Today's debate will be on the existence of God, and more specifically, has science buried God? Our presenters today are in the theist camp, which means believing that God does exist and science has not buried God, is Mr. Haggai Cadenas, who has graduated with a bachelor's in psychology and philosophy from NAU. In the atheist camp, or the belief that science has buried God, is Mr. Alex D. Decker, who is a bio major and a chemistry minor at NAU. And I know that both of these gentlemen will give us a really great debate today, so we just ask you a few things as we listen. Please try to stay respectful, turn off your cell phones, and keep it quiet as they're presenting. Later on, we will have time for audience Q&A, so go ahead and jot down those questions as you form them in your head, but don't shout anything out, even though this might be a topic that you get fired up about. We will do 15 minutes for each presenter for their original presentation. After that, they will each have a 7-minute rebuttal, and then we'll have some time for audience Q&A. So Haggai is going to start us out, and we'll go ahead and get started. Disclaimer, sorry. The views expressed tonight do not necessarily represent the views of Arizona Western College, the Arizona Western College Philosophical Society, or Northern Arizona University. Just keep that in mind.
All right, well, first of all, let me say that I am honored that you and the AWC Philosophical Society have given me the minutes to talk about such an important personal topic. Debating philosophically significant topics is an intellectual 1,000-year-old practice. So I am honored to participate in this tradition with my colleague Alex De Decker. I'm excited to hear what he has to respond. So has science buried God? Well, contrary to popular belief, science harmonizes with the existence of God. For example, 3 arguments: the fine-tuning argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, and the argument from information. These 3 arguments receive and give support to the existence of a designer, creator. It makes it more probable than not. So then burying, I think these arguments bury disbelief in God. So that means it demands assent to belief in God. The first argument starts with a finely tuned universe to infer design. What is fine-tuning? Before evolution can even begin, we need certain laws, constants, and initial conditions for the universe to be life-permitting. By laws, I mean things like gravity, and by constants, I mean the strength given to those laws. For example, gravity's constant is its strength. By initial conditions, I mean the way the universe was during the early stages. For example, the rate of expansion during the Big Bang is an initial condition. Here are some examples of finely tuned constants. If we alter the electromagnetic force by 1 part out of 10 to the power of 40, either stars wouldn't be hot enough to warm planets, or stars would burn too quickly. Now, for you non-math majors, 10 to the power of 40 means 1 with 40 zeros. So imagine 1 divided by that. If we alter gravity by this same number, either planets and smaller stars wouldn't form, or stars would burn too quickly for evolution to occur. If the strong coupling constant were slightly smaller, everything would be hydrogen. This means no complex chemistry allowed. If it were 2% larger, everything would be helium. This means no stars. Now hear this. The universe is expanding and gravity should be slowing this down. But physicists have been astonished when they found out that the expansion is accelerating. Whatever is causing this expansion is being researched. But the rate of expansion is called the cosmological constant, and in order for the universe to be life permitting, it needs to be tuned to 1 part out of 10 to the 120th power. By comparison, the number of particles in the known universe is 10 to the power of 80. So that's crazy. That's fewer particles than our lucky number. Now, let me give you some examples of initial conditions. If the speed of expansion during the Big Bang was altered by 1 part in 10 to the 60th, then the universe would have expanded or collapsed before life could evolve. The probability of having the right amount of ordered energy a few seconds after the Big Bang is, bear with me, 1 part out of 10 to the power of 10 times 123. The famous physicist Stephen Hawking writes that when the universe was at a certain temperature, a change in 1 part of a million would render the universe life prohibiting. Scientific facts like these have moved Paul Davies to write, quote, "These rules look as if they are the product of intelligent design. I do not see how that can be denied," end quote. The laws and conditions look designed. No one is arguing that. So what explanation can we offer? We have 3 options: physical necessity, chance, or design. Physical necessity means that the constants had to be the way they are. But typically scientists don't believe this, since some of the more promising theories allow for various constants. So let's leave that behind. What about chance? Maybe the laws are just a coincidence. Well, this isn't possible either, because contrary to Katniss during the Hunger Games, the odds are not in our favor. Those numbers are just too small. To avoid design, many have postulated an infinite number of universes that exist, each with different constants and initial conditions, so that we eventually end up with a universe that is life permitting. By analogy, it's like buying hundreds of lottery tickets so that winning is expected. There are serious issues with the multiverse hypothesis, but the bottom line is that it doesn't eliminate the fine-tuning. First, the only evidence for the multiverse is the fine-tuning, but the evidence counts equally as well for design, so it's no more scientific. Moreover, a multiverse would require a universe generator, but a generator would require fine-tuning. Finally, the cosmological constant reemerges in the multiverse, again requiring fine-tuning. Since a multiverse doesn't eliminate the fine-tuning, the only option is that the constants and initial conditions are due to design. Therefore, we are justified in believing in design unless design can be shown less plausible than physical necessity or chance. I'll leave that chore for my colleague to do. While the above argument points to order, the next one points to a beginning. The 20th century saw the development of the Big Bang Theory. Even if one believes in a multiverse, the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem proves that any universe that is on average expanding must have a beginning. But everything that begins to exist has a cause. It would be so bizarre to say that something can begin to exist. Some atheists have been so bold as to try and say that the universe can come from nothing and by nothing. But that is worse than magic, for at least in magic we have a magician and a hat. Moreover, why would only universes pop out of nothing? Why not soccer balls or Darwin or Miley Cyrus's new video? So the universe had a cause, but what was it? Since we can't have a finite and infinite regress of causes, whatever caused it has to be an always existing cause, and the cause is either personal or not. An always existing impersonal cause would make the universe eternal, because wherever you have a cause, you have an effect. However, a personal cause could just choose to create or not to bother. And that's why the universe is not eternal, as science confirms. Moreover, this cause also has to be powerful enough to create. I want to move on to my final argument, the argument from information. And since Darwin's time in 1953, Francis Crick et al. Found the double helix structure, which is akin to the blueprint of life. We have learned that we all have DNA, and this is very complex information. DNA is so complex that Bill Gates has said that it is like information they work with, but multiple times more complex. This is quite right. I think the majority of scientists do think of DNA as information. But we aren't talking about any kind of information. We are talking about improbable specified information, where by improbability I mean unlikely, and by specified I mean goal-directed. For example, finding the first 7 letters of the alphabet on a Scrabble board is improbable, but not specified. However, finding the words "I love you" on that Scrabble board is both improbable and specified because it's goal-directed. Since DNA is undeniably improbable and specified in that sense, we might ask, where does the information come from? In the book No Free Lunch, William Dembski defends the law of conservation of information, which states that laws, chance and laws are incapable of creating information. Laws can't create information because they are merely functions, and functions transmit information, not create it. Every output is but the product of its input. Now, chance can produce improbable information, but it can't produce improbable specified information. Dembski tells us why. After a certain amount of complexity, we no longer say it's chance, we say it's design. The cutoff rate, says Dembski, is at 500 bits of information. And DNA exceeds this by a tremendous amount. Finally, the combination of both laws and chance will not create information. It won't, because such a combination will just be a function. And we saw that functions transmit information, not create it. What does this teach us? Meyer points that no naturalistic theory can account for the origin of improbable specified information, but a design hypothesis can. Every instance of information in our life comes from intelligence. Therefore, we have adequate grounds for appealing to a design inference. It appears I missed an argument somewhere here. But anyway, what is my time, Megan? Where are you? 3:58. No, I'm good. So we have the fine-tuning argument and the argument from information and the beginning of the universe argument. And I think those have been arguments that receive support from scientific data, especially in the most recent years. For those 3 reasons, I conclude that science has actually buried disbelief in God. Thank you very much.
All right, can everybody hear me? Excellent, excellent. First of all, my name is Alex Decker, and I want to thank you all for having me here. I just flew in from across the campus. Luckily, it was a quick flight because I only heard about the debate a few hours ago. I'm filling in for the original debater, whose position was to defend that indeed science has buried or defeated God. Hopefully, I was able to write enough down to convey to you my personal position on this issue, and at the very least, to open your mind to some possibilities that maybe to this point had eluded you. Due to the time constraint I had, my argument will be primarily philosophical. I'm not going to have quite as much logical argument as Haggai did, but I will try to convey to you how I feel about it. So first of all, I wanted to point out that this question is a little vague because God is a concept which each of us has constructed our own individual idea of. benevolent, destructive, righteous, fair, perfect, all of these and more could be and probably are pieces of our construct. Perhaps we do not believe in God at all, and then the construct would merely be the absence of anything. My point is that we all have a different concept of what or who God is, and thus it is vague to say, oh, well, science defeated it, or him, or her. So to simplify, and for the purpose of this debate, I'm going to use my own concept and hope that you can accommodate your own concept of God into the context of what I have to say. Essentially, we are all products of our childhood, and thus our concept of God will generally resemble that of a religion or spirituality that has already constructed him for us. Here in the United States, the majority ascribe to a Judeo-Christian philosophy based on the Bible being the inspired word of God. I was raised a Catholic and thus am very familiar with the document. I have read it several times, and there is a wealth of wisdom in its pages. However, there is also a wealth of archaic and barbaric incidents that occur as well. It was written over 2,000 years ago, and that's just the most recent of its writings. And if we paid attention in history class, we all know that times were different. Rulers got away with terrible atrocities. People were subjected to conditions that we can only imagine in our elevated standard of living today. Thus, my concept of God was based on an account of events that happened thousands of years ago, and thousands of years before I even existed. Not 25 years ago, not 100 years ago, but 2 times 10 to the third power years ago, at the very least. And this got me wondering, throughout my childhood, my adolescence, my adulthood, why aren't these things happening today? Why doesn't God talk to someone today and work miracles through them? Why doesn't God return from heaven, save the people he promised to return for? It's been 2,000 years since Christ died for people on a cross. Yet hundreds of millions of people still wait, perhaps billions. These are the same people who refuse to pay for a pizza if it takes 31 minutes to arrive. That 1 minute is too much, but thousands of years. Well, for a supernatural phenomenon, that's okay. And somehow we ascribe this difference to it. This struck a chord with me, and it wasn't easy to accept. After all, I was raised to believe Catholicism. Perhaps all this stuff is just the game of telephone. People thought they saw things. Other people intentionally made things up to inspire a population to do something good and just, to rise up against oppressors. And how can I argue with that? If that will inspire people to save themselves, then by all means, that was the right course of action to take. And especially in a time with no education, no writing. This, while difficult to accept, is quite likely. It was probably made up. It was probably what people thought they saw. There are many explanations, other than the supernatural explanation, which we want to believe. We want to jump to that. And yet, there has been no evidence for a flood or anything of that nature in recent history. The earth has been found to be much older than the Bible suggests. Direct evidence of an inflationary theory of the Big Bang has been observed just in the last week. And while it has yet to be peer-reviewed and confirmed, the creation story has no such concrete evidence behind it. Once I realized the numerous inconsistencies in the Bible, the complete lack of supernatural events in my own life, I started to question its authenticity. How come no miracle has been captured on camera? Why is it that I have yet to see one shred of an inkling of supernatural phenomenon in my life, despite every effort, to use the Force? I really wanted to use the Force when I was a kid. This discovery was troubling. But the Bible has remained unchanged for a very long time. Yet people still cling to its tenets and use it to live their lives. And I had to ask myself, is that the best document to shape your life around? For me, I was troubled. So I got out into the world and I just lived. I tried to experience as much as I could, and maybe I would find some supernatural event to finally assuage my anxiety about it. But nothing ever showed. So what does all of this have to do with science burying God? Well, first we need to define science. Science is the forward, progressive accumulation of data and ideas regarding our natural universe. This existence we all share, here and now. Not after we die, not before we were born, here and now, and a little bit in the future. Science is the only human invention I'm aware of that is self-correcting. It does so in the following manner. A scientist has an idea, a hypothesis, and he says, well, I can measure this. So he measures something, and he concludes that, well, my hypothesis was either right or it was wrong. And then he writes it down, and he publishes it in a journal. Other scientists have access to these journals, and they read them. They then see something that interests them, and they're like, that seems funny. I'm going to test that. So then they test his exact experiment. If they get the same results, then they publish it and say, we confirm what has already been established by the scientists before me. Or if they get something that disagrees, they publish something and say, this is wrong. And we would like to see more people perform this experiment to check. If enough evidence accumulates that something published was wrong, it is taken out of the literature. It is removed. And the one that was correct, it remains. This is somewhat of an oversimplification, but it gets the point across. So, does this method of hypothesis, measurement, conclusion, and verification defeat a concept we create from a book that is thousands of years old? This is, of course, a competition within every mind, every consciousness in existence. But I consider myself a fairly logical person, and for me, I tend to prefer the data-oriented, open-minded progression of science over the rigid, stagnant, often closed-minded, not always, concept of God. For me, the choice is clear. Science has defeated the concept of God in that it can make predictions in our world. We can use it to better our lives right here, right now. We can use it to save children from starving right here, right now. We can save the sick from dying. Indeed, it has great potential and use for all of these things. There is a problem, though. And that problem is fear. We are all afraid. Of what and how badly? Well, those are the only two variables. Even Superman fears kryptonite. And Lois Lane. The particular fear I am referring to, however, is the fear of non-existence. The fear of death. It's not even really the death of our bodies that we fear, but usually the fear of not waking up and smelling the air, seeing the trees outside the window, hearing our favorite song on the alarm clock. That's a great feeling. What are the odds? These great experiences make us appreciate this incredible existence we have. So what happens afterward? Well, we are victims of terminology and the constraints of our own minds here. Afterward is a time-dependent term. Perhaps the moment we die, something happens outside the jurisdiction of time. Another universe has an opening, and we suddenly exist there. Perhaps we simply cease to exist. Perhaps we simply change. For many or most, this is scary. And so we grasp for something to connect us to this existence we have, to anchor us here. We don't want to lose this, all the experiences we've gained. We've come so far. How much have we learned? But is it worth it? Humans have always possessed this disinclination to stop existing. For one thing, all life struggles fiercely to exist, and thus it is within our very genetics to continue that struggle. It is when we try to stretch supernatural phenomena into natural existence that we run into problems. That hope that something after this is waiting for us. A perfect existence with all our loved ones. It's intoxicating. It's everything we dream of having here. But we can't because people die here. Politics. There's a plethora of other things that interfere with having heaven here. And yet, to believe that somehow after we die, that anything of this existence follows us, to me, is misleading at best. If in fact we retain any semblance of this existence into the next one, it will be our very core. Who are you? Who do you want to be? Why? These are the questions we should be trying to answer here and now. And in finding the answer, and acting on it, of course, we could be truly happy here and now. This is in stark contrast to what many would have you do and believe. They would have you preparing for the next existence, while perhaps neglecting this one. Indeed, some argue that the preparation makes this life more fulfilling, that it gives one a purpose. But if someone needs a next existence to make this one more fulfilling, then they have not tried. Seeing a sunrise, really taking in what is happening, it's amazing. A massive ball of fusing hydrogen gas with a surface temperature of millions of degrees is hitting your eyes, illuminating a world thousands of kilometers in diameter. A world teeming with something we found nowhere else, life. Science makes the most of life, makes the most of that energy, here and now. And thus more and more people are seeing that has more to offer than a promise of a future existence with extensive connections to this one. I am sure we cannot even imagine the new experience that awaits us after we leave this one behind. Perhaps we've had many existences before and have left them completely behind. I cannot remember anything before 23 years ago. And so I know that if I had any other life or existence before this, it hasn't affected me. So the question is, has science defeated God? My answer must be yes. I must believe that understanding natural phenomenon through measurement and reason trumps a concept born from fear. As more and more people lose that fear, begin acting here and now, looking straight ahead instead of straight up, you will see a positive change in our world and a bright future for humanity. Thank you.
Well, like Alex said, when I found him, asked him to replace our speaker, he was actually in the middle of milking scorpions. I didn't even know that was possible. Now on an ordinary debate, I would not really respond to most of what he said because it was off topic. But in light of the circumstances, I'm gonna follow him. I just made some general points that some problems he has with belief in God. First is that he says the concept is vague. Yeah, I'm confused because he's upset when he doesn't find evidence. But if the concept is vague, how do you know when evidence confirms or disconfirms it? So I'm hoping he can clarify that in his next statement. Next, he talks about science and how there isn't any evidence from science. Well, I gave three arguments. And he didn't respond to any of those. He didn't diffuse those. But anyways, why think that the only sorts of things we can know are scientific things? The majority of his argument was actually not scientific. So by those standards, we should disbelieve it. He also talks about the hiddenness of God. Why can't I find him? Why isn't he here yet? But I would have liked him to clarify what would count as good evidence and why should we expect that to be good evidence. Hopefully he can spell that out in his next opportunity. We hear say things like science can can predict things where religious belief cannot. But my idea is that the very possibility of science, that a world is orderly, fits best with a world that somebody has designed. A rational mind would design a orderly world, but on an atheistic worldview, why think that all these bits of matter are going to behave according to order? So unless he can give us a reason for thinking science fits better with an atheistic worldview, I'm inclined to believe it fits best with a theistic worldview. He points out that sometimes we come to believe our religious beliefs out of fear and so forth. We want comfort in mortality, we're afraid. My contention is that the way we come to form our beliefs is irrelevant to their truth value. Suppose I read in a fortune cookie that Obama is president. Does that therefore mean that Obama is not president? No, you have to do more than point to how we form the belief to invalidate. And the final argument wasn't really an argument against theism or for atheism, but it was more of a statement on the meaning of life. And he says, why can't we just be happy here? And the sunset is just beautiful enough. Now, we will both agree that cosmology has told us that eventually we're going to die. The universe is going to spread out far enough, and our sun is going to cool off if it doesn't obliterate us before. We're just not going to be able to survive forever. So then our scientists, our poets, our philosophy, our newest iPhone, all those cures that we've invented, all those heroes like Martin Luther King will no longer matter. It will just be in vain. It might matter for a moment, but there's no ultimate purpose in all that. So why be Martin Luther King instead of being a Hitler? What difference does it make? As long as we satisfy our own desires, what ultimate meaning will there be? So I don't think that we have been given a reason to believe that science has defeated God. I gave 3 good reasons to believe in God, and I haven't heard solid reasons coming from science for disbelief. Thank you.
So, can everyone hear me? Okay. I began with experience and philosophical concepts due to the nature of this debate, partly because many scientists will say you shouldn't participate in debates with a theistic topic because you can't trump supernatural phenomena. I could list off reasons upon reasons that God's not here, but in the end you could always say, well, he made it that way. It's one of those trump cards that really makes science irrelevant, and hence why I distrust it. However, he did make a good point. I didn't rebut anything he said during my intro. I saved it for this rebuttal. So here we go. He makes an argument about if you go back far enough, you run out of things, natural explanations for everything. So the Big Bang, what caused the Big Bang? We don't know. We can't understand concepts outside this universe. We are of this universe. And thus, the medium that this universe floats in, whatever it is by no means anything like this. And thus, I already have an issue with saying something had to start it, because who knows? In that medium, effect may come first. These are all human concepts. But this first cause idea comes from Sunni Muslims and medieval thinkers. It's a very old idea. And again, my problem is that we cannot conceive of anything outside our own universe. Cause may not exist, motion definitely doesn't exist as we know it, and thus justification by the prime mover, it's misleading. Any attempt to understand these conditions is going to be extremely difficult, and at best we can do a mathematical explanation. Things most people don't really want to delve into. We have difficulty grasping things that happen without a purpose or a cause. That's because everything we've ever seen in our lives, ever experienced, has had a cause and effect in our universe. There is a study that shows that week-old infants understand quantum mechanics better than adults. This is because they haven't been inundated with cause and effect. At the quantum level, things don't make sense like they do to us. For example, an infant, let's say I have 2 marbles under a cup and nothing under the other cup. I show the infant the 2 marbles. I close it again. He's still going to look under this one, just to be sure. That's how quantum mechanics works. It's possible in quantum mechanics for them to be under this one too. Understanding macroscopic physics and quantum physics, just the differences between those two things, which are both within our own universe, and the massive differences between them, the incredible difficulty there is in reconciling those two concepts, illustrates that it would be foolhardy to assume that you require a cause outside the universe. Even so, the universe may have always existed. Always, again, is a time unit, so we have to be careful. But infinity does exist, and therefore the universe could have existed infinitely. There are many theories that propose that this last Big Bang was just the most recent. That before it, there was a big crunch of the universe before, condensed down to a singularity, and then waiting for the right moment, blows again. Now this could happen over and over again for all we know, until the conditions are right, that it continues expanding, that those constants that he mentioned were perfect. It has an infinite amount of time to get it right after all, especially if time doesn't exist. So, again, when thinking about these issues, you have to step outside what you're comfortable with. Regarding the law of information, Dembski defines information as Shannon uncertainty, which is equivalent to entropy. Since entropy is known to increase, and it's constantly increasing, his law is simply wrong. No recognized theory of information has a law of conservation of information. Dembski invented this in his own non-standard theory, but his theory is not used in either science or engineering, and their findings are not supported by the vast body of research that is available today. Even if there was such a law, information is transferred from environment to organisms by natural selection and other processes. We don't know the precise origin of life on Earth, but we have a lot of good ideas. There's a lot of research going into that field as we speak. But all of that research is pointing to the fact that if you put enough energy into a system, and Earth is a system, and the sun is dumping energy into it all day long, 24 hours a day on one side of the Earth, eventually you will form macromolecules, and eventually, given enough time and the right conditions, life. Normally, physical laws must be tested and confirmed by a myriad of independent sources prior to acceptance, and Dembski cannot claim a physical law without any testing at all. So that was what I had to say on information. Fine-tuning?
That's your 7 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good.
So now we're going to have a little bit of time for audience question and answer. If I can just remind you to be respectful with your questions, try to keep them concise, to the point, and also remember to be respectful is the most important thing. So, and breathe. And brief, that was the other one. I thought you said brief. Okay, so who has their first question?
Okay, science and religion, and God. Okay, so we've had so many gods, right? Zeus, we had Zeus. We were able to climb the mountains of Olympus, and we found that Zeus was not there. We saw other gods, and they always lied in the mystery. What caused the weather? What caused hurricanes, tornadoes? And we always relied on gods and extra. Well, it was something that we couldn't understand, so we would say to gods, that it was work of the gods. So we, throughout the years, throughout the millennia, we have used this method, the scientific method, to understand these phenomena, and it's been working for us. We've been able to understand these things. Now, my question is, are we always going to rely on the God of the gaps to prove that God exists? Or are we going to, or what's the difference between relying, sorry, I can't, well, let's just answer the first question, I guess.
I'm glad you asked that question. Now, God of the gaps is a fallacy where you say, okay, this is a set of data. Who can explain it? Well, no one. Therefore, God did it. That's fallacious. Abduction or inference to the best explanation is when you have a set of data and you consider the competing hypotheses and you say which one best explains the data. And that's why you infer to the best explanation. Let me just give you an example. In my fine-tuning argument, I laid out the possibilities: physical necessity, chance, or design. I gave my reasons why physical necessity and chance just won't explain the data. And just by inference to the best explanation, we go to design.
Time limit on these responses, or? Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked, because indeed, God does seem to be retreating to the realm of things that are left to be disproven. But he claims, fine-tuning is a evidence for the existence of God, but it's an unproven idea. It suggests supernatural phenomenon which science cannot measure and therefore cannot support. And that's why science, in the context of this debate, buried God. The more likely conclusion is that the universe explodes and implodes all the time, and when it gets it right, life has the chance to arise. Consciousness has the chance to exist. So indeed, chance can explain it, especially when you're dealing with infinity, when you're dealing with the absence of time, because that's really what constrains everything. And so without that, if you have an infinite amount of time to implode and explode, to have a big bang and a big crunch, or on the other hand, an infinite number of universes in which to have life exist, then in either case, chance actually demands that you will get life, that you will get the perfect variables. So I would have to disagree.
All right, next question. Do you have a question?
To Haggai, you were using the seeming order of this universe as a support for the fine tuning and to the likelihood of it actually end up being the way it is. But I find issue with that, in that you're basing consciousness, the ability to think, as something that comes after the physical. So I would assume that, being a theist, you would say that consciousness would be something from God. So wouldn't constraining it to something physical, such as this reality as we know it, end up being limiting God?
Limiting God in what way?
Or limiting.
In what way?
Well, it's because I'm assuming that. Do you believe that conscience is something that would end up coming from God? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so you're then adding constraints of the physical as we know it upon to God's ability and powers. So saying that God exists because the universe is so fine-tuned, you end up limiting the powers of God in making that assumption.
I guess the problem is that you're misinterpreting the argument. The argument isn't to say that look at all these amazing constants. The purpose of the universe is for us. The argument is rather, look at all the fine-tuning of the universe. We should infer design.
But wouldn't that assume that consciousness can only exist in the kind of physical bodies and universe that we currently have?
Well, I mean, it might assume that, but it's just irrelevant. It's just irrelevant here.
Any more questions?
I'm going to try to be really respectful. I'm sorry. But this question is meant for you and you. I saw that you used the oscillating universe model, which is a Big Bang and the Big Crunch. Actually, atheists have abandoned that, saying that the Big Bang and the Big Crunch could have only happened a finite amount of times. And I want him to expound on that. And also, coupled with Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, I also want you to expound on that. Why do you hold to an atheistic worldview, and also with the complexity of life and the failure of any natural explanation to arise for the beginning of life? Why do you still hold to atheism? Also, again, there's no empirical evidence for the multiverse. That's it.
To go first, or did you want me to go first? Either way. Okay, so first, why do I hold to an atheistic worldview given the complexity of life? Is that the first one? Okay. 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 So again, we are dealing with a lot of speculation when we talk about the beginning of the universe, because we have no idea the medium that this universe sits in, for one thing. We have no idea the laws outside, anything like that. And so anything we try to come up with is going to be speculation. It can be educated speculation. It can be imaginative speculation, but it's going to be speculation. So given that we're finding that the universe is increasing, that there's rate of expansion is increasing, throws a wrench in a lot of theories. But something must have happened. We know that. So is it a Big Bang and a Big Crunch? Is it just this one expands forever? Perhaps we're just limited by what we can see, that perhaps light was created for the first time 13 billion years ago in this part of the universe. There's a lot of theories. I mean, there's a lot. And most of them are speculation based on math. So again, I cling to the atheistic view because to me it's more elegant and it's more beautiful. If this all is here without a designer, if we happen to exist on this planet, in this solar system, by chance, that to me is amazing and beautiful. And it gives me more meaning than any designer ever would. Because it really makes me want to understand this place that gave me this chance. So that's why I cling to it. And perhaps it's a little bit of a poetic reason, but that's why. What was the other one? The complexity of life, yeah. The complexity of life, I believe, is a result of something that can't be avoided, which is once life starts, it becomes complex. It's gonna change and evolve to occupy every possible niche it can, because it wants to survive. It wants to exist. DNA, Haggai brought up, it's information. And we all exist to perpetuate that DNA. Essentially that is why we exist. So, why does the complexity of life not daunt me as far as inferring a creator? It's because I don't think there's any other way it could have happened. I don't think life would have gotten simpler. I don't think that, because then it would have stopped existing. And if that were the case, then perhaps it would have opened the way for a new life, which could become more complex. Again, we are one example on one planet in a vast and perhaps infinite universe, perhaps infinite number of universes. So taking anything from this, again, it's not a very big sample size. But from what I see, it's the only way it could have happened, especially given that the sun is continually dumping energy in. We have all this energy to use. We're going to use it to fill every possible place we can.
He also asked about no empirical evidence for the multiverse.
Oh, that's right. There's no empirical evidence for anything outside our own universe, but that's because we haven't figured out how to get out there yet. Give it time.
All right, if I can take them in the order that I remember them, the oscillating model, if I understand correctly, has been pretty much abandoned. If you look at the 20th century cosmology, we can call it the history of failed eternal universes. The model after model tries to give us a hope for an eternal universe. I guess Alex is still in the 20th century because he thinks that it's possible. You asked about the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. Basically, it's that any universe that is on average expanding has to have a finite beginning. And here is where Alex says, no, it's this universe who had the beginning, but maybe there's a multiverse. But if that multiverse is expanding, which the theory is that it is, even that had a beginning. And from there, my arguments would follow. If you're totally lost in who's this multiverse, look up on YouTube the Vilenkin theorem, and you'll find Alexander Vilenkin explaining his own theorem with math and his scholarly words. He talks about how everything at this point is just speculation, but I mean, I've presented some information. Let's build our theory on the information we have right now, not on the information we hope to have. And I don't think he understood my argument from the complexity of life. It was, the problem isn't how we transmit information. The problem is, where does the information come from? He says that we all just exist to perpetuate our information. This is a very famous idea championed by Richard Dawkins, and it really puts him at odds with what he was saying earlier, that why can't the beauty and the elegance of the world be here? If if all our purpose is to perpetuate information, well, there's nothing beautiful about that. We just live to pass on our babies. But moreover, on the atheistic worldview, how can the world be elegant and how can it be beauty? Where does beauty come from on the atheistic worldview? I hope that those were your questions.
Do you mind, can I say something real quick, just in rebuttal to what he said? To be clear, when I was saying we live to perpetuate our DNA, that is the biological purpose. However, humanity has acquired this quirky consciousness thing, which gives us a whole nother purpose. So I just wanted to be clear, biologically speaking, that is the only purpose. However, consciously speaking, that's a whole different story.
Another question? Okay.
Okay, so I have two questions, one for each of you, and I try to ask the question two sides of the same coin, and it goes to the question: Has science buried God? You, sir, the question for you is: I'd like you to address the God trump card that he brought up earlier. In other words, doesn't matter what perfect explanation he gives, and no matter how science is able to explain things outside of the theistic point of view, you could always just say, well, yeah, and that's how God made it. And, well, yeah, that's how God made it. So once you lose the argument, then you pull out the trump card and says, well, yeah, that's how God made it. So I'd like you to address that and maybe give us kind of your point of view of that. And then for you, sir, the question I have for you is, can the theist hypothesis be one of the hypotheses to explain everything that you're trying to explain? And I would say that if you say yes, then science hasn't quite buried God yet, because it's still one of the hypotheses. So I think that if you can answer the question to the original question about has science buried God, that's my point of my question for both of you.
The concept you're touching on with the trump card is in logic called ad hoc. Now suppose there's these things called no-see-ums, right? And then I say that they are what keeps the chairs standing. Well, I don't see them. Well, that's pretty much what they are. They're no-see-ums. And I'm like, well, can I lift up the chair and look? No, they're just very small. What if I put like 10 elephants? Well, they're also very strong. Well, what if I burn this whole place? Will they still be there? Like, well, no, they're also irresistible to fire. And we just try to come up with all these reasons to check for it, and these no-see-ums just become ad hoc. So the question is God like that? Well, I don't see how that was very clear that it is. Instead of, what I did was start with a set of data and ask what is the best explanation for the set of data. And according to the theories we have right now, that's what I consider to be the best explanation.
All right. So for me, it was, can the theist hypothesis be one of the hypotheses to explain everything? The problem is that it's not testable. And until God is testable, I can't say that it is. No. So until God is not supernatural and has a natural form that I can say, okay, he's 6'1", I can't tell you one way or the other anything about him. Anything I tell you is merely speculation, again. So, no.
I believe that we're out of time, so thank you all for coming very much. Let's give a warm round of applause to our presenters. I think they both did a really excellent job. If you enjoyed the kind of intellectual conversation that this was, the Philosophy Club actually has meetings every Monday at 3:05 in room 2116 up here in the 3C building, and we'd love to have you come on down. And if you have any more questions for these guys, I'm sure that they wouldn't mind if you came up and talked to them, but thank you very much for coming and have a great weekend.